Welcome to the Asian continent, where in the harsh climates of Western Asia, also known as the Middle East, you'll find either camel riders or Lamborghini drivers. To South Asia, home to people who once helped me conquer math homework, to East Asia, which everyone seems to think represents all of Asia, to Central Asia, where a lot of people forget this place even existed, and finally to Southeast Asia, or as I like to call it, the Water Balkans. Oh, and also North Asia, which is basically just Russia. Now that you have arrived at this episode, today we'll dive into the forgotten countries that existed for only a short time during an era of history marked by wars and chaos. Colonization and humiliation plagued the entire continent, leaving scars that continue to haunt generations even today. However, we'll focus on just the stories of 4 nations from different periods of Asian history. After all, Asia is a colossal continent, larger than an entire planet, or a dwarf planet, whatever. These forgotten nations had interesting stories that led to new nations inspired from them directly, or a simple nod to their mistakes. And we're exploring the overview of these lost nations in history. The Tagalog Republic, the predecessor state of the Philippines. In the last days of August 1896, when the Spaniards realized that the idea of running a colony from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, separated by multiple continents and oceans, was essentially expensive and a complete logistical nightmare to protect and administer, had to deal with Filipinos who decided to revolt and strive for independence. It began when a former Freemason, Andres Bonifacio, inspired by global uprisings against colonial powers, founded the Katipunan in 1892, a revolutionary organization whose goal was to overthrow Spanish rule and establish a Filipino government, or the Haring Bayan Katagalugan in their native language, as he preferred to call his new nation. Not only were the Spanish annoyed by this, but seeing the Cubans revolt as well, they were further agitated when Bonifacio declared a republic. Sending an army to such a distant colony was a disaster waiting to happen, yet they prevailed, which failed horrendously. Now, when Bonifacio proposed the name Haring Bayan Katagalugan, it was of course no surprise that those who weren't even ethnically Tagalog weren't particularly fond of it. However, his term Tagalog in this case didn't just mean people from a single ethnic group. It was essentially an attempt to remove Spanish imperialist names and promote Philippine nationalism. Although that distinction didn't matter much when the Tejeros Convention of 1897 began, leading to the shocking result of Bonifacio losing the election. While the election was probably rigged, at least allegedly, Bonifacio refused to accept the results and declared the entire meeting void. This failed horrendously as Aguinaldo allegedly again ordered Bonifacio's arrest, charged him with treason, ultimately had him executed, effectively ending the Tagalog Republic, although that remains debatable whether Aguinaldo himself actually did, but all of the best sources were burnt in World War II, so take it with a grain of salt. So the fate of Andres Bonifacio's Tagalog Republic was short-lived and ultimately led to his death at the hands of his own people. While Aguinaldo's faction continued to fight, the First Philippine Republic, meant to replace the Tagalog Republic, would soon be challenged by a major power across the seas, to which we all know who I'm talking about. The People's Republic of Korea, not to be confused with North Korea, of course, was another short-lived nation. It was a provisional government meant to organize and establish nationhood in the Korean Peninsula at the time of the surrender of the Empire of Japan at the end of World War II, and subsequently, the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, which eventually allowed the Soviets to touch the Pacific Ocean through Chongjin. The Japanese at the time, particularly Governor General Nobuyuki Abe, realized that Japanese citizens would be subjugated by the Soviets and tried asking a Korean journalist and activist, Song Jin-woo, to assume administration throughout the peninsula to buy the Japanese time to escape, leaving the Koreans to deal with the Soviets alone. Unsurprisingly, this failed horrendously, so they turned to Lee Won-hyung to take up the job instead. Now, this was important because Lee was instrumental to this forgotten nation. He became the first leader of the Korean People's Republic, that very night formed the National Preparatory Committee, declaring Korea a democratic republic under a provisional government, even adopting this unique flag. However, the problem was that the Soviets and the United States had already occupied Korea and divided the peninsula. Now, with the US in the picture, you'd think their democracy would align with US interests and they'd be installed as the government in Seoul, especially since they had legitimacy and popularity. But you'd be dead wrong. The United States declared them illegal and illegitimate because Leo's ideas about promoting equality sounded a bit coming. Before all this, the Soviets were pretty enthusiastic about Liu's government and even advocated for them once during US-Soviet briefings about the peninsula's future. But with the emergence of other Korean communists, particularly that man who somehow always looks good in portraits for some reason, they became more favored than the committee. Not to mention, Liu was later assassinated by some far-right, effectively marking the end of the Korean People's Republic, the Empire of China. Or if you're feeling fancy, the Hongxian monarchy was hands down the worst blunder Yuan Shikai ever pulled. In December 1915, he declared himself Emperor of China, adopting the era name Hongxian. This move sparked outrage nationwide, not helped by Yuan's earlier acceptance of most of the Japanese infamous 21 demands, which had everyone thinking he was a Japanese puppet. Now, Yuan's legitimacy was already horrendous even before all of this. The assassination of Kuomintang leader Song Jiaorun painted him as a tyrant, and the warlords in the west and southwest of China weren't exactly sending him holiday cards. Even in the east, much of the military wasn't under his direct control, but instead loyal to regional warlords. Things fell apart quickly. Guangdong and Hunan revolted, kicking off the National Protection War. Yuan's loyal troops weren't even around to help, being bogged down fighting unionist warlords who were making gains in Guizhou and Sichuan. Desperate, Yuan renounced his imperial title after just 83 days, but the damage was already done. Provinces broke away, doing their own thing, and Sun Yat-sen returned to China, fanning the flames of rebellion. Later, Yuan's health deteriorated under distress and he died of uremia in 1916. His death ended the National Protection War but plunged China into the warlord era, a chaotic period where his former allies tore the country apart. Basically, a complete catastrophe just by one single blunder of wanting to fulfill his emperor persona and wet dreams. Finally, the last forgotten country, located in the Far East and slightly to the north of Japan, the Republic of Ezo. This was a separatist state established in 1869 on the island of Ezo, which is known today as Hokkaido. Unfortunately, this video is becoming far longer than I anticipated, so I'll have to explain briefly. The Republic of Ezo was essentially formed by the remnants of the Tokugawa shogunate's military at the end of the Bakumatsu period in Japan. Think of it as what Taiwan might have become if history had gone differently. After losing the Boshin War to the Meiji Restoration, the Tokugawa loyalists retreated to Ezo and set up their own government. Surprisingly, they attempted to institute democracy, though naturally voting rights were restricted to the samurai caste. The Republic's first and only president was Admiral Enomono Takeaki, who led his allies in their retreat to Ezo. The nation lasted just 7 months before being subdued by the Empire of Japan, a rising power that would soon change the face of Asia forever. So anyway, that's all for today. Imagine if we live in an era where our country changes its government numerous times, or changes once elsewhere in another country. That'll be crazy. So anyway, thank you all for watching. And that's all for today. Love and peace.